Hello again, trumpet players. If you didn't see the previous video, I was at a funeral, and I promised that I would make a video later today, before the second gig, telling you about how I ended up working with the Ed Gerlach band. It was Ed Gerlach's funeral that I was at this morning. I did a video on gratitude before that video. Before that, the funeral. Had a wonderful time at the funeral. The band played what was billed as our final set, and as a band. But there's talk about getting gigs now, with those guys and that book. So that, it was wonderful to sit down and play that book with those guys. Dennis Dotson was with me. Dennis said he had forgotten how great these charts were. Wonderful charts. And that's like half the band right there. If you got great writing in the band, that's half of the battle, in my opinion. That's just half of the battle right there. Anyway, so I was going to tell you how I ended up in that band, because when I first got into town, now for this to make sense, you have to understand that I'm not a very sociable person. So when I first came into town, I had a lot of trouble getting established, because I didn't know how to, whatever you want to call it, mingle, or I couldn't do that. That's not part of my personality. I don't do small talk. I don't drink. That's a big thing, right? I don't smoke. There's nothing that I do. The sports, I don't do the sports. I'm not after women. There's hardly anything in my life that I can connect with people. So what I decided I was going to do, I ended up getting this gig, right? It's within the first year that I was here. And since I was going to jam sessions, I met some of the jazz guys. And I ended up getting this gig. In fact, the gig where I'm sitting right here was right across the street. And it was with a band leader named Phil Blackman. It was a jazz gig. Dave Nichols was the bass player, and that's all I remember in the band. But we were actually broadcast live on the radio, KTSU. And a friend of mine, Daryl Bear, had recorded the broadcast for me. I took that broadcast and sent it off to the different big band leaders in town with a nice letter in a cassette tape. And Ed Gerlach was one of the people I sent it to, and he sent me a very nice letter back saying, no thank you. Right? He says, this is not what we do. He enjoyed it, but that's not the kind of music his band plays, and that was it. Well, after that, Buddy Cisco, who was leading the band, and this is what they told me, right? Buddy Cisco and Dennis Dotson started telling Ed Gerlach about me. And then I started teaching at HSPVA, the Houston Performing and Visual Arts High School, right? And HSPVA had a gala. And my boss, Bob Morgan, asked me if I wouldn't play with. So the gala, the music for the gala was Ed Gerlach, but not just Ed Gerlach. They had brought in Les Brown to conduct the band playing Leapfrog. Ba-da-da-da-bum, bum. But that's one of those Les Brown tunes. So I think Maybe what was happening is a book called for 4 trumpets or something like that. Somehow they needed another trumpet. And Bob Morgan asked Ed Gerlach if it was okay for me to play with the band at the HSPVA gala, since I was basically on the staff at HSPVA at the time. And so that was sort of like the introduction. After I played the Les Brown gig, he started calling me for subbing. And you know what? That's how this works. That's how, I don't know how it works today with the new types of bands that they've got. But in the old days, the way you got in with a band was you subbed. Right? The way you got established with a band was to sub with them. And that's how I got started with Gerlach. I was subbing for him, and then what happened was we did an out-of-town gig. I was subbing for Buddy Cisco, and I remember Tom Miller was on my right. I think it was Tom Miller, and who I can't remember who was on my left, but I was playing lead on that gig. And we got to When You're Smiling, that standard chart that everybody uses, right? And the part was missing in the book. So they flagged Ed down. They said, wait, we can't do this tune. There's no first trumpet part. I said, no, don't worry about it. I know it. And it counts off the tune, and it just happened that out of all the many, many big band charts that are out there, that just happened to be one of the ones that I have memorized, the first trumpet part, right? So I played 2/3 of the first trumpet part by memory. I say 2/3. Why? Because, and I don't think Mr. Gerlach knew this. Tom Miller found my part during one of the rests. So I got 2/3 of the way through the chart. Didn't really need the chart, because it's, like I said, I already had it memorized. So, but yes, technically I only played 2/3 of it by memory. The first 2/3, obviously. On the break. So this is an out-of-town gig. I think we were in his hometown up in the east, northeast part of Texas. I forget what the Taylor, I think, is Taylor, Texas. I think that's where we were. On the break, he comes up to me. I'm sitting down somewhere, and he comes up to me. He says, Eddie, I would like to hire you as a regular for my band. And you know, I think back to that day, and I wonder, was my response to him appropriate? Was he looking for me to be a little bit more emotional about it? Because he looked actually a little bit. In fact, I think he had to say it again, because I don't think my response was what he was expecting, right? Because I just said a very flat thank you, right? And and that's, the previous video that I did about the gratitude and talking about how I'm not an emotion-driven person. If I say thank you, it's thank you. I don't have to be jumping up and down for it to really mean thank you. So, I'm not saying he was like upset or anything. I just don't think. I think his response was an indication that maybe he thought I didn't hear what he said because anyway. So he comes up to me after that set that we did where I played that one tune by memory, and he says, "I want to make you a regular in my band." So from that point forward, this must have been about 1990, 91, somewhere around there. From that point forward, I was in the band. Whenever he had a gig, he called me. Fortunately, he's one of those that would call soon enough in advance that, so, one of the reasons why I didn't behave more emphatically when he said, "I want you to be in my band," was because the times that I had been, quote unquote, a member of someone else's band never went well. And I think it's a personality thing. And I had just been burnt by a band leader. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there were two band leaders. One of them you could say burnt. The other one I would never use that language for because I actually have dear memories. What's the word that people use? Fond memories. That's what I'm trying to say. I have very fond memories about working with that band and stuff like that. But there were two bands during that time in my career here in Houston that really stuck me out, left me out in the cold. I'm trying to say different idioms at the same time. Had left my head sticking out. I get my idioms all mixed up, but I think you get the idea, right? I make myself vulnerable for these bands, and all I get is hurt, right? So I think even by the time when I started working with Gerlach, I think I was already not willing to be vulnerable anymore, if that makes sense. So yeah, I guess the way you would say it is that my response to him was kind of cold. But from that point forward, I know I'm jumping around a little bit. From that point forward, I was in the band. And at first I was playing third part. It was Buddy Cisco on first, Dennis Dotson on second on the jazz chair, and I was playing all the third. And I think when it comes to the big band stuff, those were the most important years of my whole career. To play in that band, that chair, for it must have been 5 or 6 years that I was. It seems like I don't have exact dates, right? It seems like 5 or 6 years that I was the third trumpet player, Dennis was second, and Buddy was first. And having those two guys, and then Gerlach as musical mentors was phenomenal. That's, you can't pay for an education like that. You just can't pay for that. You can't pay for that. I'm repeating myself, right? But that's education that you can never, ever, ever, it's priceless, I guess is what I'm saying. It's so extremely valuable. And just to, and also as an arranger, sitting and reading those parts. I played with Buddy and Dennis also in Ricky Diaz's big band, which was also another phenomenal band. But yeah, I might be getting the years kind of wrong. It might not have been that early. It might have been more like 93, 94 in that area. It all gets a little bit washy in my head. So, after a while, Dennis isn't playing with the band anymore, and I start playing second a lot more often. And there were times when Buddy Cisco couldn't do it, so I'm subbing more on lead. And really, I know all three chairs of the Gerlach book intimately, because I spent all those years, all that time on the third chair. I spent several years on the second chair, and then whenever he needed it, I could play lead. And you know what? One time he sent my check in the mail or something like that, and he wrote on the check, he says, "It's so good to be able to call you." And I think what he appreciated was that I was okay playing any one of those three books, so it helped. That's my interpretation of what he wrote, right? It helped him make his choices about who he was going to hire, because I could be like that Jack, that I could do this, I could do that, or I could do that, right? And it was it was an honor to even be in the band at all, really. So then, at one point, and I'm only throwing this in, it's gratuitous, I know, you'll hardly ever hear me do this kind of stuff. I'm not one to brag, but there are certain points in my career that I consider to be milestone moments. And there was one day, and I'm horrible with names, I can't remember the guy's name that wrote the chart, but there's a chart that Gerlach had on Sandpiper, forget the name of the Sandpiper. There's right? The Shadow of Your Smile, that's what it's called. And the story that I remember him telling was that this famous arranger wrote that chart just for him and gave it to him for his birthday, or something like that. Maybe I'm getting the details a little bit mixed up. But one night I'm playing that solo, and he stops the band, which he doesn't normally do, right? He stops the band. We're at River Oaks Country Club. He stopped the band to say to me, in front of the whole band, that he wishes that his buddy, the one that wrote the chart, famous arranger, right? I'm not saying just some arbitrary buddy. This is some very famous arranger. I don't know if it was Bill Gannon or Billy May or somebody like that. Okay, I don't remember who the writer was. But he says he wishes that writer was here today to hear me play that chart. He says I'm playing it exactly the way it should be played. That he's certain that when the arranger wrote that chart, that was the sound he had in his ears. For someone of that caliber to say something that nice to you, really, that was like that. Him saying that to me was like a milestone in my career. It really was. And you know how long it took me to get there, right? Because to play like that, I had to not do all the stuff I could do. And I wouldn't have known to do all that if I hadn't been listening to Buddy, if I hadn't been listening to Dennis, if I hadn't been spending that time just soaking up the style and the phrasing and all that stuff that the band was using. These were all, these weren't hack players. These weren't just great players. These were guys that knew the style. I shouldn't say were. I mean, a lot of the guys that were there today were the guys that were in the band when I was playing. Some of them have died and some of them can't play anymore and stuff like that, but a lot of the guys that were in the band today were actually guys that played with the band. So, and yeah, so that's my story about Gerlach. At first, he was not interested at all because I was playing, that show that we did that got recorded was more of a fusion show, a fusion act. And, I could see how he would listen to that and say, you know what? Because, just because someone's good at one thing doesn't mean that they're automatically good at another. And I think that's where my head was back then. I think what I was thinking was that, because that's how you think of it in school, don't you? That if you're good enough to be in the combo, then obviously you can play in the big band, right? We think too linearly like that sometimes. So I can appreciate why he would say, this is not what we do. I've made that mistake myself, actually. There's a great saxophone player here in town that when I first heard him playing, he was playing Kenny G stuff, right? And I'm like, someone asked me about if I would want to play with that guy or something, and I'm like, no. I don't have as bad of a attitude towards Kenny G as a lot of other people do, but I did make that same mistake that we're talking about now. Just because someone can do this doesn't mean they can't do the other, right? Anyway, so good. I'm glad I told you that story. And it didn't take as long as I thought. My behind the wheel videos do get kind of long, but the whole point is to share this time with you. And if you don't have time to do that, I'm not trying to sell you anything. You know what? That's one of the ways that I'm not trying to sell you anything. Because if I was trying to sell you something, this is not the way to do it. I'm sharing my time with you. I'm not much of a social person. This is just how I do it, right? This is how I share my time with you. I'm not very good at doing the social thing. So, anyway, that's my story about Ed Gerlach, how I got into the band. Now it's time for me to go work, pay the bills, right? I'm working with a new band tonight that I hadn't ever played with before. What's nice about it is it's a horn section. Now, I've played with all the guys in the band, but the horn section, with one exception. Okay, so I used to play in a band in the 90s where the horn section was 3 of us 4 tonight. This is a 4-horn band tonight. In the 90s, I used to play with 2 of these other 3 guys, right? So it's kind of gonna be like a little reunion tonight, even though it's my first time on the gig. And from what I hear, my understanding is this gig is very much similar to the gig that we used to play together in the 90s. So that's kind of nice. I'm looking forward to that. I thought that stuff was corny back when in the 90s. But then, it's not so corny when it goes away. It's, you can say all you want about a gig, but when you lose that gig, that's a whole different, it gives you a whole different. What I'm talking about now is this guy that I'm talking about, where there's an Ed Gerlach connection there too, because I'm talking about Pat Hill, the Toomey Starks band. Pat Hill used to be Ed Gerlach's bass player, and then he went off on his own and started his own band. And but it was like a very corny, I guess is the best word for it, corny music, corny presentation. That's another one that I miss working with. You don't think you're gonna miss something like that, but when it's gone, you find a way to miss it. Anyway, that's what I got for you today. I hope you enjoy hanging out. Thanks for hanging out with me, and we'll see you on the next video. God bless you.